Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to be taking a look at how harmony guitar parts work. And this is a sound that I've loved ever since I first started playing, and I used to listen to classic rock and metal stuff which often seems to feature these great dual lead guitar parts. And certainly if you're in a band with two guitar players, this can be a really fun thing to play around with. But even if you're not, you can still have fun with harmonies by using a looper pedal or a harmonizer pedal. And certainly if you're into writing and recording, it can be great to understand how this stuff works so that you're able to multi-track your own harmony parts. I want to begin by going through the basics of how this works. Then I'm going to play through a few of my own favourite classic examples. And do let me know in the comments if you've got any favourite harmony guitar parts of your own, particularly if you can think of some more unusual ones. I'd be interested to find out about those. But anyway, let's get started. Now the basic idea is that you've got a melody and then you're doubling that melody with a harmony part, and that harmony part can be above or below the main melody, and the harmony is going to have a particular intervallic relationship to the main line, and you can describe that using terms like thirds or sixths, so musical intervals, i.e. the distance between the two notes in the part. So let's see how that works on the guitar, and I'm going to come at this to begin with using double stops. And when you're playing double stops, really you are playing a harmony guitar part. You're just playing both of the notes at the same time on a single guitar, but it's exactly the same principle. So I think it's a good way of understanding this. And very often when I'm coming up with harmony guitar parts, I will try them out as double stops to begin with, just to see if the part works, and then you can split it out over a couple of guitars. And let's do this in the key of G major. And just for clarity, I'm going to be playing my melody on the third string along the length of a single string. So if we're in the key of G major, the notes we can play around with to create melodies are the G major scale. So we could do that like this. So G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp and G. And what I can do is harmonize that scale by playing another note on the second string, and that would sound like this. So that was a G major scale harmonized in thirds, and let me just explain how that works. So I was just playing the G major scale along the length of the third string. The notes I was playing on the second string were a third above, so 3 notes higher in the key, in the G major scale. So if we take our G starting note, a harmony note, which is going to be on the second string, is going to be a B. So you can just think up the G major scale from your starting note. So G, A, B is going to be the harmony. So G and B is our first pair of notes. And then we just continue that process with the other notes in the scale. So A, our harmony note is going to be 3 up from that. So A, B, C. And then B and D, C and E. Then we've got D and F sharp. F sharp because F sharp is built into the G major scale. We don't want an F at that point because F doesn't belong to the key, and that would sound a bit out of place. So we've got D and F sharp, E and G, F sharp and A, and then back to G and B an octave higher. So we've got this nice series of double stops, the G major scale harmonized in thirds. And notice that we're dealing with 2 different shapes here on the fretboard, and that's because we've got 2 different intervals involved here. They're all thirds, but some of these are major thirds, some of them are minor thirds. So major thirds, if you're playing them on the second and third strings like this, major thirds are going to be where you've got both notes at the same fret, and then minor thirds are where the notes are on adjacent frets. So we've got a major third, minor, minor, major, major, minor, minor, and major. And these differences in the type of third are forced on you by the nature of the scale, the intervals in the scale. It would sound wrong, for example, if I played the entire scale harmonized using major thirds, just parallel major thirds, the same interval all the way up. That would sound like this. which just sounds a little bit wonky. I mean, in a way, it's quite a cool sound, and there are times when you might want to deliberately play something like that. But if you're trying to stay within a key, and I'm just playing parallel major thirds, then quite a few of those notes aren't going to be in the key, and it's just going to sound a bit wonky. So this is where, if you are coming up with your own harmony guitar parts, you need to be aware what key you're in and what notes belong to those keys, because most of the time you're going to want your harmony part to conform to the key. And sometimes you can just do this by ear. If you've got a decent ear, you can kind of just hear this stuff. You don't need to come at it from a theoretical standpoint necessarily, but if you run into trouble, then this theory stuff can actually really help you. And if there's something not sounding quite right, you can usually analyze it in terms of what notes are in the key, and then you can fix any problems you might be having with your harmony part. So that's the basics of how harmonizing something in thirds would work. So I could just come up with a very simple G major scale melody, maybe something like that, and then I could harmonize it with a note a third higher, and then you've got two separate parts there, so, and then the higher part, and that's your harmony part. You can play it as double stops, or you can split it out across a couple of guitar parts, and that will work with any melody. You've got your melody and you just need to track that melody note with a note a third above, and I'm just demonstrating it along the neck here, along the length of this pair of strings. But obviously you don't need to do that if you're playing with two guitars. You can play in position, you can lay out those notes any number of different ways on the guitar, but I just think this is a clear way of understanding how the theory works. And although thirds are, I think, by far the most commonly heard interval in famous harmony guitar parts, you don't have to stop there. You can use any of the other musical intervals as well, and that works in the same kind of a way. So if we wanted to harmonize our G major scale in fourths, for example, we just play something like this. So there I've got a note a fourth above on the B string. So G, A, B, C is a fourth above, and then you just sort of tracking that fourth interval up through the scale. And it gives a very different sound. Each of these intervals has its own kind of a character, so it's something you can play around with and see what you like the sound of. You could do fifths. And then perhaps sixths as well. If you do sixths, then because it's quite a wide interval, you'd have to really stretch if you were playing it on a pair of strings. So I'm going to place the harmony note on the top string and play some sixths. So there the notes are 6 letters apart in the musical alphabet. So G going up to E, G, A, B, C, D, E, A, and F sharp, and so on up through the scale. And you could even do sevenths, which has got a bit of an unusual sound, but it's an option. So bit of a weird one, but actually quite an interesting sound, worth playing around with. So those are some of the basics of how this stuff works. In practice, you'll find you don't have to stick rigidly to this diatonic interval stuff. A lot of classic guitar parts will mix up different intervals, and they will break some of these rules. There'll be notes which are outside the key, or you don't seem to follow some of these theoretical rules. So as always, theory is just a kind of guideline. It's there to help you understand this stuff. In practice, you can just do whatever you think sounds cool and experiment, and if it breaks the rules and it sounds good, it doesn't really matter. This is one of the tracks I think that made me fall in love with the sound of harmony guitars, and it's from the Revolver album, and there are great harmony guitar parts throughout this track. I just played the introduction, and this one's in the key of E major. All of these melodies come from the key of E major, and most of that introduction is harmonized in straight diatonic thirds. Diatonic meaning all of the notes belong to the key, belong to the E major scale. So you've got the low guitar part, that's harmonised a third above with this part. So you can see, you can hear how those parts are a third apart. So just the opening bit of the melody, kind of a little scale sequence ready. And it's just harmonised with notes from the E major scale, but a third above. But quite interestingly with this one, with quite a lot of the parts that I'm going to talk about, it's not just straight diatonic thirds all the way through. Sometimes they choose to depart from that strict adherence to diatonic thirds. In particular, this part here where the riff starts climbing up again, that is harmonised like this. And if I try and play those intervals together as double stops, you've got this kind of thing. A beautiful sound, but we've actually got a third, fourth, sixth, a fifth, and then back to thirds again. So really interesting the way that harmony works. And why did they choose to do it like that rather than stick with strict diatonic thirds all the way through? And I can't tell you the answer to that question, but I suspect they were just messing around with harmony ideas, and that was what stuck out. That was what sounded best, what sounded coolest. So you've always got to be guided by your instincts and by your ears. And I definitely recommend that when you are coming up with your own harmony guitar parts, you can maybe start out with an interval in mind, maybe try and harmonise a melody in thirds, but then step back and listen to your parts. You can tweak them a little bit, change an interval here and there, and you can improve parts that way, and you'll end up with something which is a bit less predictable and boring if you're mixing up the intervals even just a little bit. So I can't really do a lesson on harmony guitar parts without talking about some classic rock, and this is a great Thin Lizzy riff. I'm sure everybody knows this one. It's got a low part which goes like this, and then the higher part. So some quite interesting things going on here with the intervals. We're in the key of A major. All of the notes are taken from the key, from the A major scale. But that opening, if I try and play the two lines together as double stops, we've got this. So we've got some fourths, we've got a major third, we've got a unison in there as well. It starts off harmonised in fourths, then it goes to a third here, and then both guitar parts are playing the same note. We've got an open low A and then an A and octave higher. And I suppose one of the ways of thinking about this is as though you're harmonising the notes in the A major pentatonic scale. You can think of pentatonic scales as containing these double stop intervals. And it's a mixture of thirds and fourths when you're dealing with pentatonic scales. And that's mostly, I think, how this riff seems to be harmonised. It's notes from that A major pentatonic scale. Mostly, I think. There are, I think, one or two notes from outside that scale when we get towards the end of the riff. Love this riff. This was one of my childhood favourites, and obviously in 80s metal there was no shortage of great harmony guitar parts, but Iron Maiden I think did it particularly well. And with this riff we've got a high part, and then it's harmonised a sixth lower with this. So quite interesting here, you've got these lines a sixth apart, which is more unusual I think than thirds, although sixths and thirds are very closely related. You can think of them as being inversions of one another. If we took that low part and put it up an octave, then the two parts would be in the relationship of a third. That's one of those sort of interesting symmetries you get with music theory, and that's something that you could try with your own parts. If you have something harmonized in thirds, just drop the octave of the higher part and then it's in sixths, so you get a similar feeling, but a subtly different sound with sixths as opposed to thirds. And this one is mostly harmonized in straight diatonic sixths, although just at the end of the riff, as it turns itself around, we've got this. There's a moment where both guitars play the same note, the G, so there's that unison in there, which again I think serves to make the riff a little bit more interesting than just using those strict diatonic sixths throughout. This is the riff I played at the start of this video, and it's from the intro to Sweet Jane on the live Lou Reed record Rock and Roll Animal, which is a little bit of a divisive record. Some people don't like it. I am a fan of this record, but it was where Lou Reed took a lot of his beloved classic songs and turned them into proper rock tracks with dual kind of lead guitars in harmony. And this bit is kind of the overture to the entire album, and we've got this great kind of soaring dual lead guitar melody, and it's in the key of C major. The low part and that's harmonized with this higher part. And that opening part, if I play the two parts together, we've got minor third, a fourth, and then a major third. And each of these parts is just going up an arpeggio, really. So you could think of that as a first inversion C major, and then the second guitar is climbing up a second inversion shape. In the second part of the riff, it's just diatonic thirds in the key of C major. This is another great 70s track, reeling in the years, and this one's lots of fun to play. Quite a challenging one to play up to speed. It is quite fast, but the low part of the harmony goes like this. And that's harmonized with this higher part. We're in the key of A for this one, and the actual chords at this point are going from A to G, so you've got kind of a mixolydian, A mixolydian sound happening here, and of course the harmonies work in the same way, whether it's major, minor, or more of a modal kind of flavour. Here we're harmonising that A mixolydian scale more or less in thirds in this riff, so all of the first bit of the riff, you've got, that's all giving you that thirds kind of sound. The interesting bit is at the end of the riff, you've got that, and so that's harmonised a little bit more loosely, and again that makes it sound cool, I think, rather than just being diatonic thirds all the way through. That bit is not quite so closely harmonised, and there are some fourths and some other intervals flying around. And here it's probably just because it was kind of a guitaristic thing. Those kind of pull-offs and those open strings kind of feel good under the fingers when you're playing a riff, and that probably dictated the shape of the harmony, I would imagine. Another favourite harmony guitar part would be Impossible Germany by Wilkos. It's something of a modern classic, I think. So we've got the main melody. And then that's harmonized mostly a third higher with this part. Incidentally, that's quite an interesting question. Which is the main line in a harmony guitar part? What's the main melody and what part is the harmonization? Is it the higher part or the lower part? And I don't know if there's a definitive answer to this. I did try and look this up, but it all depends on your perceptions of a melody. I think some harmonies you're going to hear the high part as the most prominent, as the main part, and then in other harmonies the lower part is going to be the most prominent. And with this particular riff, I'm not sure. I think I probably hear the lower part as the main melody here, though I'm not absolutely positive. I'm sure other people would hear it the opposite way around, but that's quite an interesting question. Anyway, this one's in the key of G major. All of these notes are taken from the G major scale, and as I said, mostly this is just harmonized in straight thirds. So certainly the first bit of the riff, got the same thing played up a third. And the way this is constructed, it starts off with 3 notes, and then we're just extending the phrase each time. 4 notes, is that 6 notes, and then you've got a longer phrase. And as I say, that's harmonized with a higher part. I think the interesting bit of this riff is towards the end, where you've got that bit there, and that's harmonized with this. So at one point you've got this, one of the guitars is playing a G, one of them is playing an A, so you've got this kind of major second sound, which is quite a dissonant interval. You've got this kind of that kind of sound, which I really like, because you've got this little bit of a kind of rubbing, jarring interval just momentarily in the riff, and then it resolves itself and you've got these sweet major thirds at the end. So that's one of the things that makes this riff interesting for me. Have we got time for one more riff? I just wanted to talk briefly about Message in a Bottle by The Police. This is another very famous riff, but I think what is less well known about this one is there is a harmony part to this riff. It's mixed a little bit low on the original recording, but it's definitely there, and it does add a really nice flavour to the track. So the main riff goes like this. We've got and then the harmony part goes like this. It kind of sounds a little bit weird in isolation, but when you put the two of them together, it does really work. So I've just got the harmony part in my looper pedal here, and I'll put the two of these parts together. I mean, incidentally, practicing harmony parts with a looper is really fun and a useful thing to do. So you can, with any of these riffs, you can record one of the parts into a looper, and then you can play the other part along, and then you've got the harmony happening. And this one's in the key of C sharp minor, and that harmony part is really just up a third from the main riff, apart from on the last chord, where interestingly it's a fifth apart. So it's just one further example of how you don't have to stick to the same interval throughout a harmony part. For some reason Andy Summers chose to switch to a fifth on that last chord, and it just makes it stick out, and it makes it a bit more interesting. Okay, that's it for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it. As usual, I will be meticulously tabbing out all of the examples, and you can find those tabs up on the Patreon page. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you next time.